An elderly woman passed away and didn't leave a will. When her greedy daughter went to claim that, if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Lauren Parker sat at her desk in a sleek office overlooking the bustling streets of Chicago. At 42, she was one of the youngest directors in her company's history. Her days were packed with high-stakes meetings and ambitious deadlines, and she thrived on the chaos. But this day would be different. It would change everything. If you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Her phone buzzed for the third time in an hour. Lauren sighed heavily, her manicured fingers pausing over her laptop. She glanced at the screen and saw the same name flashing, Mom. She clenched her jaw and hit ignore, muttering under her breath, "Not now, Mom." "Miss Parker," her assistant called from the doorway. "The conference room is ready." Lauren straightened her blazer and grabbed her presentation folder. "Let's do this," she said, exuding confidence as she strode out of her office. The next 2 hours flew by in a whirlwind of numbers, charts, and strategic plans. When the board unanimously approved her proposal for the company's largest acquisition to date, Lauren allowed herself a rare smile. She had earned this moment. Back in her office, the high of victory quickly faded when her assistant approached again. "Your mom's been calling nonstop," she said hesitantly. "She left several messages. She says it's urgent." Lauren frowned, the smile slipping from her face. She sat at her desk and unlocked her phone, staring at 5 missed calls and 3 voicemails. With a sinking feeling, she pressed play. "Lauren, sweetheart, it's me. Please call me back when you get this. It's important." Delete. "Lauren, I really need to talk to you. Please, just pick up. It's about, well, it's important." Delete. Her stomach tightened as the final message began. Her mother's voice sounded weak, strained, almost desperate. "Lauren, I know you're busy, but please, I need you to come home. It's urgent. I don't have much time left." The line went silent for a moment, followed by the sound of a shaky breath. Lauren froze. "I don't have much time left." The words echoed in her mind as she stared at her phone, a knot forming in her stomach. Her pulse quickened as 1,000 questions swirled in her head. Was her mother sick? Why hadn't she mentioned anything before? Without thinking, Lauren hit the call button. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered, shaky but relieved. "Lauren, thank God." "Mom, what's going on? What was that voicemail about? Are you okay?" Lauren demanded, her tone sharper than she intended. Her mother, Eleanor, took a deep breath on the other end. "I need you to come home," she said softly. "Mom, I can't just leave right now. You know how busy things are here. Can't we talk about this over the phone?" "No," Eleanor replied firmly. "This isn't something we can talk about on the phone. Please, Lauren. It's important." Lauren closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair as memories flooded her mind. The last time she had been home, the arguments, the unresolved tension. She had sworn she wouldn't go back unless she absolutely had to. "Mom, is this about Dad again? Because if it is, it's not about your father," Eleanor interrupted. "It's about me, and you, and things you need to know." Something in her mother's tone made Lauren pause. "Are you sick?" she asked cautiously. There was a long silence on the other end. "Just come home, Lauren. Please." The line went dead before Lauren could respond. She sat in stunned silence, the weight of her mother's words settling over her. Finally, she sighed, picked up her phone, and buzzed her assistant. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week," Lauren said, her voice tinged with resignation. "I need to book a flight to South Carolina." The plane touched down in Charleston under a hazy afternoon sky. Lauren stared out the window as the runway sped by, her thoughts a storm of anxiety and resentment. She hadn't set foot in her hometown in nearly 10 years, and now, here she was, flying back into the past she'd spent so much effort trying to escape. As she navigated the rental car through the winding streets of Palmetto Cove, the familiar sights stirred a mix of nostalgia and unease. The small coastal town looked frozen in time, with its quaint storefronts, colorful fishing boats bobbing in the marina, and the same old diner where she used to meet friends after school. But something felt different now, off somehow. When Lauren pulled up to her childhood home, her heart sank. The two-story house perched on the edge of the ocean looked far more worn than she remembered. The once pristine white paint was peeling, and the garden her mother used to tend so lovingly was overgrown with weeds. She turned off the car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Why does it feel like this house is as tired as she sounded on the phone? Before she could knock, the front door creaked open. There stood Eleanor Parker, or what was left of her. Lauren's breath caught. The vibrant, no-nonsense woman she had grown up with was now a shadow of her former self. Eleanor's frame was thin, her face lined with exhaustion. Her fiery auburn hair had dulled to a streaky gray, and her hands trembled slightly as they gripped the doorframe. "You came," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, Lauren saw a flicker of the strength her mother had always carried. "Of course I came," Lauren replied, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. "What's going on, Ma? You sounded, I don't know, scared." Eleanor smiled weakly and stepped aside. "Come in, sweetheart. There's a lot we need to talk about." The house smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comforting scent that instantly took Lauren back to childhood. But as she walked through the familiar halls, she noticed how much everything had aged. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture worn, and an eerie silence hung in the air. They sat in the living room, where Eleanor carefully set a small, ornate wooden box on the coffee table. It was intricately carved with swirling patterns, its brass lock gleaming faintly in the dim light. Lauren's eyes fell on the box. "What's that?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Eleanor's fingers tightened around it, as though afraid it might disappear. "This," she said quietly, "is part of why I asked you to come. But first, we need to talk about something else, something I've kept from you for a long time." Lauren's heart skipped a beat. "Kept from me? Mom, what's going on? Are you sick?" Eleanor hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window as if searching for the right words in the horizon. "I am," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But this isn't just about me. It's about our family. About you." Lauren felt a chill creep over her. "What are you talking about?" "Lauren," Eleanor said, her tone soft but firm, "there are things about our past that you don't know. Things I never told you because I thought I was protecting you. But now, I don't have much time left, and I need to make things right." Lauren stared at her mother, the words swirling in her mind like a storm. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? We could have done something. We could have gotten you help." "It's not about treatment," Eleanor interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "It's about the truth, and it's about what's in this box." Lauren glanced at the box again, her unease growing. "What's in it?" Eleanor smiled faintly, but there was something heartbreaking in her expression. "Answers," she said simply. "But not all of them. Not yet." Lauren stared at the wooden box, her unease growing with every second of silence between her and her mother. The intricate carvings on its surface seemed almost alive in the flickering light of the old lamp. "Mom," Lauren said, her voice steady but edged with frustration, "if you've called me all the way here just to show me a mysterious box, I need more than cryptic answers. What's going on? What's in there?" Eleanor's frail fingers traced the swirling patterns on the box's lid. "Lauren, what's in this box will explain a lot. About me. About our family. But it isn't the whole story. I've made mistakes, some big ones, and I thought I had more time to make them right." Lauren leaned forward, her voice softening despite her growing tension. "Then let me help you. Tell me what's going on, so we can figure it out together." Eleanor smiled faintly, but her eyes held a sadness that made Lauren's stomach twist. "I will, sweetheart. But there's something I need to say first." Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "I'm sick, Lauren. I've been sick for a while. And the truth is, I don't have much time left." Lauren felt the air leave her lungs. She had suspected it since the phone call, but hearing it aloud felt like a blow to the chest. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this from me? I didn't want to burden you, Eleanor replied. You've worked so hard to build a life for yourself. I didn't want to be the reason you stopped chasing your dreams. Lauren shook her head, anger and sadness warring within her. You should have told me. I deserve to know, Mom. Eleanor reached across the table and took Lauren's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You're right, and that's why I called you home, because there's something I need you to do. What is it? Lauren asked cautiously, glancing again at the box. I need to finalize my will, Eleanor said, and I need your help to make some changes. Lauren blinked. What kind of changes? Eleanor hesitated, her eyes falling to the box again. Significant ones, she said quietly. There are things I've hidden, things I've kept from you, because I thought I was protecting you. But now, I need to make sure everything is set right before I go. Before Lauren could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Eleanor's face brightened briefly. That must be Jake, she said, standing slowly. Jake? Lauren asked, frowning. He's been helping me around the house since I got sick, Eleanor explained. He's a good man. As Eleanor opened the door, Lauren saw a tall, broad-shouldered man standing on the porch. He had an easy smile and a confidence that seemed at odds with the humble setting. Hi, Miss Parker, Jake said warmly, stepping inside with a basket of groceries. Lauren felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or jealousy. You seem very comfortable here, she said, her tone sharper than intended. Jake raised an eyebrow, but Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. He's been a godsend, she said firmly. Now, Jake, thank you for these, but I need to talk to my daughter. Jake nodded, glancing briefly at Lauren before heading back out. When Eleanor returned to the living room, Lauren crossed her arms. So, are you going to explain what's going on? What did you mean about setting things right? Eleanor sat down, her expression growing serious. Lauren, there are things you don't know about your father, about our family's past, and some of those things are in this box. Lauren leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. Then open it. Show me. Eleanor shook her head. Not yet. You need to understand the bigger picture first. Before Lauren could protest, Eleanor's face suddenly paled. She swayed in her seat, her hands clutching the armrest. Mom! Lauren cried, rushing to her side. Eleanor's voice was faint. The box, Lauren, promise me. Promise me you'll open it when the time is right. Mom, stay with me, Lauren said, her heart pounding as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. As the ambulance sirens blared in the distance, Lauren sat clutching her mother's hand. The weight of the box and its secrets loomed larger than ever. Lauren paced the hospital waiting room, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her nose. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a hammer to her nerves. Her mind raced back to the moment her mother had collapsed, her cryptic words about the box lingering like a shadow. The box promised me you'll open it when the time is right. What was Eleanor hiding? Why now? Lauren's thoughts were interrupted when a nurse stepped into the room, her face calm but serious. Miss Parker. Lauren hurried over. Is she okay? Can I see her? She's stable for now, the nurse replied. You can go in, but try to keep it brief. She needs rest. Lauren nodded, her heart pounding as she entered the dimly lit room. Eleanor looked so fragile in the hospital bed, her skin pale against the white sheets, but her eyes fluttered open when she heard Lauren approach. Lauren, Eleanor said softly, her voice barely audible. Mom, Lauren said, pulling a chair close to the bed. You scared me. What happened? Eleanor gave a faint smile. Just my body reminding me it's not what it used to be. She paused, her gaze steady. But I need you to listen to me now. No interruptions. Lauren nodded, her chest tightening. I've kept things from you, Eleanor began, her tone deliberate. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I thought I was protecting you. Your father. He wasn't the man you think he was. Lauren stiffened. Mom, I told you before, I don't want to talk about Dad. What does he have to do with any of this? Everything, Eleanor said firmly, her eyes glinting with a rare intensity. He left behind more than just memories, Lauren. He left behind responsibilities. Secrets. And those secrets are tied to what's in that box. Lauren's breath caught. Mom, just tell me. What's in the box? What aren't you saying? But before Eleanor could answer, a knock at the door broke the moment. Lauren turned to see Jake standing there, his expression hesitant. Sorry to interrupt, he said. I just wanted to check in and see if you needed anything. Eleanor managed a weak smile. Thank you, Jake, but I'm fine. Jake nodded, but his gaze lingered on Lauren. If you need anything, just let me know, he said before stepping back out. When the door closed, Lauren turned back to her mother. Mom, who is Jake really? He seems to know a lot about you and this house. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Jake's been helping me since I got sick. He's more involved in this than you realize, but he doesn't know everything. Lauren's frustration bubbled to the surface. So, he's just another piece of the puzzle you won't explain. Mom, you're driving me crazy here. Eleanor reached out and took Lauren's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Listen to me. There are things you need to uncover for yourself. The answers are in the box, but you have to be ready for them. Lauren opened her mouth to protest, but a nurse entered the room. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. Miss Parker needs rest. Reluctantly, Lauren stood. Fine, she said, her voice tight. But I'm not going anywhere until I understand what's going on. As she left the room, her mind swirled with questions. The house, the box, Jake, and now her father. Lauren felt like she was caught in a web of secrets she didn't know how to untangle. That night, back at her childhood home, Lauren sat in the living room staring at the ornate box on the coffee table. Her fingers brushed against the carvings as her mother's words echoed in her mind. Promise me you'll open it when the time is right. She hesitated. The key Eleanor had given her heavy in her pocket. Part of her wanted to open it now, to rip away the mystery and confront whatever lay inside. But something held her back. Instead, Lauren poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out at the dark, endless ocean. For the first time in years, she felt small, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on her. Whatever her mother was hiding, Lauren knew one thing for sure. It was going to change everything. The morning sun streamed through the worn curtains of the living room as Lauren sipped her coffee, staring at the small box on the table. It had haunted her all night, its secrets tempting her every time she glanced at it. The key felt heavy in her pocket, but she hadn't yet found the courage to use it. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Lauren opened it to find Jake standing there, holding a folder in one hand and a to-go cup of coffee in the other. Thought you might need this, he said with a small smile, handing her the coffee. Lauren raised an eyebrow but took it. Thanks, but I already. She gestured to the mug in her hand. Jake shrugged. You can never have too much caffeine. Mind if I come in? Lauren stepped aside, letting him in. What's with the folder? She asked, nodding toward the papers he carried. It's your mom's will, Jake said, his tone shifting to something more serious. She asked me to help finalize it with you. There are changes she wanted to make. Lauren's chest tightened as she sat down, watching Jake spread the papers across the coffee table. What kind of changes? She asked cautiously. Jake hesitated, glancing at the box on the table before meeting her eyes. Significant ones. She wanted to ensure her work here continues. It's tied to the community center project she's been quietly funding for years. Lauren frowned. Community center? What community center? Jake leaned back, crossing his arms. Your mom didn't just sit around after you left, Lauren. She's been pouring her heart and her money into creating a place where people here can rebuild their lives. Education programs, childcare, job training. She wanted to leave something that mattered. Lauren's jaw tightened. And she didn't think to tell me this sooner. Instead, she waits until now, when she's running out of time. She thought you wouldn't understand, Jake said simply. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Why? Because I left? Because I built a life somewhere else. Jake held her gaze. Maybe. Or maybe because she knew you'd come back when it mattered most. Lauren looked away, her emotions churning. So what does this have to do with her will? Jake flipped through the documents, pointing to a specific clause. She's leaving the house, her accounts, and most importantly, the community center project to you. Lauren froze, her coffee cup trembling in her hand. What? No. That's not. I don't even live here anymore, Jake. I have a career, a life back in Chicago. I can't just drop everything to run a community center. Jake's expression softened. She knew this would be a lot to ask. But she believed in you, Lauren. She thought this could be your way of reconnecting. With her. With this town. With yourself. Lauren stood abruptly, pacing the room. This is insane. She's basically tying me to this place. To a project I didn't even know existed. What if I say no? Jake hesitated before answering. If you refuse, the project dissolves. The funding dries up, and everything she built disappears. Lauren stopped in her tracks, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She looked at the papers spread out on the table, at the ornate box that seemed to be watching her every move. This feels like manipulation, she said quietly, more to herself than to Jake. Maybe, Jake said, standing. But maybe it's also her way of giving you a second chance, at understanding her, at making a difference. Lauren didn't respond as Jake left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sat back down, staring at the will and the box. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. There are things you don't know about me, about us. For the first time, Lauren felt the pull of something deeper, something she couldn't ignore. Lauren parked her car in front of an old brick building at the edge of town. The community center, or what was supposed to become one, stood tired and incomplete. A faded sign over the door read Palmetto Outreach Shelter, and the chipped paint on the walls told a story of neglect. As she stepped inside, the sound of crying children and hurried footsteps filled the air. A woman with frazzled hair and a clipboard approached, her expression a mix of relief and desperation. You must be Lauren, the woman said. I'm Susan, the director. Your mom spoke about you a lot. Lauren forced a polite smile. Hi, Susan. I'm here to figure out what this place needs. Susan raised an eyebrow. What it needs? A miracle would be a good start. We're understaffed, underfunded, and we just lost a major grant that was keeping us afloat. Your mom was the glue holding this place together. Without her, we're barely surviving. Lauren glanced around. The building was buzzing with activity. Volunteers passing out meals, children huddled in makeshift play areas, and women sorting donated clothing. It was chaos, but there was also a sense of purpose. What exactly was my mom doing here? Lauren asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and frustration. Susan smiled faintly, her eyes softening. Everything. She started programs for women to get their GEDs, job training for single parents, and after-school activities for kids. She even covered the bills when donations ran short. Lauren's chest tightened. This wasn't the mother she remembered, the strict, pragmatic woman who had always emphasized independence and self-reliance. She never told me any of this, Lauren said, more to herself than to Susan. She was humble like that, Susan replied. But she believed in this place, and she believed in you. She thought you'd know what to do when the time came. Before Lauren could respond, a shout echoed from the back of the shelter. The basement's flooding again. Susan groaned. Great, just what we need. I'll take a look, Lauren said, surprising herself. The basement was a damp, cluttered mess. Water pooled on the floor, threatening to destroy boxes of supplies. Lauren rolled up her sleeves and got to work alongside a few volunteers, moving items to higher ground and plugging the worst of the leaks. Hours later, soaked and exhausted, Lauren stood outside the shelter, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Jake appeared beside her, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Didn't expect to see you down here getting your hands dirty, he said with a smirk, handing her a cup. Neither did I, Lauren admitted, taking a sip. Jake leaned against the wall, his expression thoughtful. This place meant everything to your mom. She saw it as more than a shelter. It was her way of giving people hope. Lauren looked down at her muddy boots. It's overwhelming. I don't know how she managed all this. She had help, Jake said. And now so do you. if you're willing to stick around." Lauren didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back at the shelter, at the flickering lights in the windows and the people bustling inside. For the first time, she felt a flicker of connection to her mother's vision, to the town she'd tried so hard to leave behind. Lauren sat at the shelter's makeshift office, the hum of activity outside her door a constant reminder of the importance of the work her mother had started. She was reviewing grant applications when Jake walked in, his face unusually tense. He held an envelope in his hand, and Lauren immediately knew it wasn't good news. "This just came in," Jake said, placing the envelope on the desk. Lauren frowned, picking it up. As she opened it, her eyes quickly scanned the legal jargon until the words "contestable" jumped out at her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Robert Caldwell," Jake replied. "He's contesting your mother's will. Claims she mishandled funds for the community center and diverted money into her personal accounts." Lauren felt a jolt of anger. "That's absurd. My mother wasn't a thief. She poured everything into this place." Jake nodded. "I believe you. But Caldwell's not messing around. He's got lawyers and, apparently, what he claims is proof." Lauren's chest tightened. "Who is this guy anyway? Why would he even care about my mother's will?" Jake leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "He worked with your dad. From what I've heard, they had a falling out. Something to do with money. Your mom never talked much about it. But I think whatever happened between them is at the root of this." Lauren's mind raced. The name Caldwell stirred a memory, distant but sharp. She could almost hear her parents' voices from years ago, raised in a rare argument. "You don't understand, Margaret," her father had said, his voice low but angry. "You can't keep doing this. It's going to come back to haunt us." "I'm doing what's right," her mother had replied firmly. Lauren shook the memory from her mind. "If this is about my dad, why drag my mom through the mud now? She's gone. What does Caldwell even want?" Jake sighed. "He's after the property, the community center, the house, all of it. If he wins, everything your mom worked for could be dismantled." Lauren clenched her fists. "That's not going to happen. I won't let it." Days later, Lauren found herself in the small-town courtroom, the weight of her mother's legacy pressing heavily on her shoulders. Across the aisle, Robert Caldwell sat confidently, his suit crisp and his demeanor calm. His lawyer stood, addressing the court with an air of superiority. "Margaret Parker misused funds from her charitable endeavors," he declared, holding up a stack of documents. "The evidence shows financial transfers to personal accounts under her name, clear indications of misappropriation." Whispers rippled through the room, and Lauren felt her stomach churn. The lawyer continued, painting her mother as a fraud who had betrayed the trust of the community. When it was her turn to respond, Howard Greenwood, her mother's trusted attorney, stood with quiet confidence. "These claims fail to capture the truth about Margaret Parker's actions. Every dollar Margaret moved was reinvested in her projects when outside funding fell short. She sacrificed her own stability to ensure this community center would succeed." Howard's words seemed to calm the room, but Lauren noticed Caldwell's smirk didn't waver. The turning point came when Howard called an unexpected witness, Rita, one of the longest-serving staff members at the shelter. Rita walked to the stand with a determined expression, her voice steady as she spoke. "I worked with Margaret for years," Rita began. "I saw firsthand what she did for this town. She didn't take a dime for herself. When the shelter couldn't pay its bills, she stepped in. When families had nowhere else to go, she found a way to help. If you think she misused funds, you're looking at it all wrong. She saved us." Her testimony sent a ripple through the room, shifting the energy. Whispers turned into quiet nods of agreement, and for the first time, Lauren felt a glimmer of hope. After court adjourned for the day, Howard handed Lauren a sealed envelope. "I found this in your mother's things," he said. "I think you should read it before tomorrow's hearing." Back at the house, Lauren sat at the kitchen table, the envelope resting in front of her like a ticking clock. Finally, she opened it, revealing a handwritten letter from her mother to her father. "John, I know you'll never forgive me for what I've done, but I had to protect our daughter. The truth would destroy her. I hope one day you'll understand." Lauren's hands trembled as she read the words. What truth? What had her mother been protecting her from? Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from the shelter. "Lauren, it's Susan," the director said, panic in her voice. "We've got a problem. The roof's leaking, and with this storm coming, we might have to evacuate." Lauren grabbed her coat and keys, leaving the letter on the table. Whatever secrets her mother had been hiding, they would have to wait. Right now, she had a responsibility to protect what her mother had built, no matter what. The storm had passed, leaving the shelter intact but shaken. Families who had sought refuge in the community center were starting to return to their routines, but the damage was a reminder of how fragile everything was. Lauren stood in the middle of the main hall, her arms crossed as she surveyed the cracked ceiling and water-stained walls. Susan approached her, holding a clipboard. "We're lucky it wasn't worse," she said. "But this place needs more than patchwork fixes. Your mom was pushing for a complete renovation before things got worse." Lauren nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we'll finish what she started." She spent the next week throwing herself into the work. Days were consumed by meetings with contractors, reviewing grant applications, and rallying volunteers. Nights were spent combing through her mother's old files and journals, uncovering just how deep Margaret's commitment to the town had been. Lauren found receipts for personal loans Margaret had taken out to keep the shelter afloat during hard times, handwritten notes about families she'd helped, and plans for expanding the center's services. One evening, as she worked late in the shelter's small office, Jake walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're still here?" he asked, setting a cup in front of her. "Apparently, I live here now," Lauren replied with a dry smile, rubbing her temples. Jake leaned against the desk, studying her. "You know, for someone who swore she couldn't wait to leave this town, you're doing a hell of a job keeping it together." Lauren looked up at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "I didn't get it before," she admitted. "What my mom was trying to do. She wasn't just running a shelter. She was creating something that mattered, something that lasted. I can't let that fall apart now." Jake nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "She'd be proud of you." The turning point came during a town hall meeting. Lauren had called the meeting to rally support for the shelter's expansion, but as she stood at the front of the room, facing a mix of curious residents and skeptical faces, doubt crept in. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling under the surface. "Many of you knew my mother, Margaret Parker. What you may not know is how much she gave to this town. She dedicated her life to helping people rebuild theirs, and now it's our turn to honor that legacy." She outlined her plans for the shelter, expanding the building to include classrooms, a daycare, and counseling offices, as well as creating programs for job training and financial literacy. "We can't do this alone," Lauren continued. "We need your support, whether it's time, donations, or spreading the word. This is about more than one building. It's about a future we can all be proud of." The room was silent for a moment before a man in the back stood up. "Margaret helped my family when we had nothing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If she believed in this, then I do too." One by one, others began to voice their support, sharing stories of how Margaret had touched their lives. Lauren felt a lump rise in her throat as the energy in the room shifted. After the meeting, Jake found her outside, leaning against her car. "You did good in there," he said. Lauren let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I just hope it's enough." "It will be," Jake said with quiet confidence. "You've got this." A few weeks later, Lauren stood in the renovated shelter, watching as children played in the new daycare area and women attended a job skills workshop in the next room. The walls were freshly painted, the roof repaired, and the energy in the building was palpable. Susan approached, a rare smile on her face. "We're officially at capacity," she said. "I think your mom would have loved to see this." Lauren nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of pride and sadness. "I wish she were here." "She is," Susan said softly. "In everything you've done." For the first time in years, Lauren felt a sense of peace. Her mother's vision had become her own, and for the first time, She truly understood the meaning of home. The shelter's reopening was more than just a milestone. It was a turning point for the entire town. Families who had once struggled now had a place to find hope. Single mothers attended job training sessions while their children played safely in the daycare. Teenagers joined after-school programs, and women found the courage to start over in the counseling rooms. Lauren stood near the entrance, watching the steady flow of activity. Her mother's dream was alive, and for the first time, Lauren felt like she was a part of something bigger than herself. Jake walked up beside her, hands stuffed in his pockets. "You've built something incredible here," he said. Lauren glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "It's not just me. This place was my mom's heart and soul. I just followed her lead. And added your own touch," Jake said. "She left you the blueprint, but you made it happen." As much as Lauren tried to deflect the praise, she couldn't ignore the sense of accomplishment swelling in her chest. For years, she had poured her energy into her career, believing that success was defined by titles and paychecks. But here, in this small town, she once couldn't wait to escape. She had found something far more meaningful. That night, as the town gathered for a celebration at the community center, Lauren sat quietly in a corner, sipping a glass of wine. She watched the people she'd come to know over the past few months, people who had once felt like strangers, but now felt like family. Susan approached, her ever-present clipboard replaced with a rare smile. "You should come say a few words," she said, nodding toward the stage. Lauren hesitated, shaking her head. "This isn't about me. It's about my mom." "Exactly," Susan replied. "And you're the one carrying her legacy forward. People need to hear from you." Reluctantly, Lauren stood and made her way to the stage. The crowd quieted as she took the microphone, their faces expectant. "When I came back here," Lauren began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I didn't know what to expect. My relationship with this town, and with my mother, was complicated. I thought I'd left it all behind for good. But what I've learned is that you can't truly leave behind something that's a part of you." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "My mom dedicated her life to this place. She saw potential where others saw problems. She believed in people, even when they didn't believe in themselves. And I think she saw something in me, too, even when I couldn't see it myself." Lauren took a deep breath. "This community center isn't just a building. It's a symbol of what we can do when we come together. My mom gave everything to make this happen, and now it's our turn to keep it going." The room erupted into applause, and Lauren stepped back, overwhelmed by the warmth and support surrounding her. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Jake found her outside, leaning against a railing overlooking the ocean. The moonlight cast a silver glow across the water, and the cool breeze carried the faint scent of salt. "You've come a long way, Lauren," Jake said softly. She glanced at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "So have you. I never thought I'd find myself back here, let alone feeling at home." Jake reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Funny how life works out. For the first time in a long time, Lauren didn't feel the need to rush, to plan, or to prove herself. She simply stood there, letting the moment settle around her, knowing that for the first time in her life, she had truly found where she belonged. Months had passed since the community center's grand reopening, but its impact only grew stronger with time. The once struggling shelter had blossomed into a beacon of hope for the town. Women were finding jobs, children were thriving in the new programs, and families were rebuilding their lives. Lauren sat in the office her mother had once used, surrounded by a mix of old memories and new plans. On the desk lay the ornate box, the one her mother had entrusted her with before she passed. For weeks, Lauren had been hesitant to open it, fearing what secrets it might reveal. But today felt different. With trembling hands, she inserted the small brass key her mother had given her and turned it. The lock clicked softly, and the lid creaked open. Inside, she found an assortment of letters, photographs, and a journal. The photographs told stories Lauren had never known. Her parents as young newlyweds, her mother holding her as a baby, and snapshots of Margaret volunteering at the shelter years before it became the community center. But it was the journal that held the most profound revelations. Page after page detailed Margaret's struggles and sacrifices. The personal loans she had taken to keep the shelter afloat, the arguments with her father over finances, and her unwavering belief that helping others was worth any cost. One entry stood out. Lauren doesn't understand yet, but I see the same fire in her that drives me. She'll fight this one day. Not because I asked her to, but because it's who she is. Tears blurred Lauren's vision as she closed the journal. Her mother had seen her potential long before she had seen it herself. The following week, Lauren stood on the stage at the community center's one-year anniversary celebration. The room was packed with townspeople, volunteers, and families whose lives had been touched by the programs Margaret had started. "Thank you all for being here," Lauren began, her voice steady but emotional. "This center represents more than just my mother's vision. It represents the strength of this town and the power of believing in one another." She paused, scanning the room. "When I first came back, I didn't think I'd stay. I was so focused on what I thought I was leaving behind that I didn't see what was right in front of me. But this place, it's changed me. You've changed me." The crowd erupted into applause, but Lauren wasn't done. "And while we've accomplished so much, there's still work to do. So, tonight, I'm announcing the expansion of our programs to neighboring towns. We're taking my mother's dream even further." The room filled with cheers, and Lauren stepped back, her heart swelling with pride. That evening, Lauren found herself walking along the beach, the cool sand beneath her feet and the rhythmic sound of the waves calming her thoughts. Jake appeared beside her, as he often did now, his presence steady and comforting. "You've done something amazing here," he said, his voice soft. Lauren smiled, the moonlight catching her face. "We've done something amazing." Jake reached for her hand, his grip warm and firm. "So, what's next for you, Lauren Parker?" She looked out at the endless ocean, her heart lighter than it had ever been. "For the first time, I'm not sure. And for once, that feels okay." Back at the community center, Lauren sat at her desk, staring at the photo of her mother she had placed there. Margaret's kind eyes and gentle smile seemed to look back at her with pride. "I get it now, Mom," Lauren whispered. "I finally understand." The center was buzzing with life again, children laughing, women chatting, and volunteers bustling about. And for the first time in her life, Lauren felt whole. She had found her purpose, her home, and herself, all in the legacy her mother had left behind. If Lauren's journey inspired you, imagine how much we can accomplish by embracing our own untapped potential. Like this video, share it with others, and comment below. What legacy would you fight to carry forward? Let Lauren's story remind us all that the most precious treasures aren't found, they're created.